Thanks so much, Dan. Fantastic perspective from our region of the world. And as with all of these sessions, we will now have an international perspective. So really exciting to continue to build on that. As uh, as I introduce our next speaker, I'm going to introduce him by a single name. And so this is our next speaker, like Shakira or like Beyonce, is known worldwide by a single name. And for someone who's a dean, who my faculty refer to me as "Damn you, Kaprowski," it is amazing and my great honor to introduce Jhala. Jhala is a friend, has been working in conservation of large mammals primarily since he received his PhD from Virginia Tech in 1991. Soon after that, he began working at the Wildlife Institute of India, became dean, and has had just a remarkable impact on the field. In India, he's been responsible for setting up national monitoring programs that have been modeled throughout the world for everything from tigers, leopards to elephants. And they have become models for people around the world. He's trained over 1,600 conservation practitioners, which is just an amazing impact. And I think as we talk in this meeting about how we have impact and the importance of connecting with practitioners, Jhala has done that from the beginning of his career, and we're talking about doing it together in the next few months as well. So even though he's retired, I think he is busier in retirement, as today will indicate. It's a real pleasure for me to introduce someone who has had the kind of impact that he has on so many. There are a number of people in this audience that have been impacted directly by Jhala. And I will say that as we walked around and met a number of scientists earlier this year, the most common thing I heard was, "Can I talk to Jhala? Can I talk to Jhala? He was my major professor, or my major professor's major professor." So to have that kind of impact, to make a difference in conservation is not an easy thing. It requires being a wonderful partner. Jhala, you are a wonderful partner. Thank you so much.
Thank you, John, for those kind words. Thank you, Temple and John and the Hop School for inviting me and giving me the opportunity to speak to you. And thank you all for your listening to me. So I'm going to talk about large carnivore conservation and how we use science to do this in my part of the world. And I'm going to build up a lot on what other speakers have spoken, especially Mr. West here, who has laid the foundation of the cultural impact can have on conservation ethos. So we talk about large carnivore conservation. So we use them, the characteristics of large carnivores makes them very conducive to use them as icons for conservation. They need large landscapes, and we're talking about large landscapes. They act as umbrella species, because if you have large carnivores in an ecosystem at the apex of the trophic level, you have the entire ecosystem conserved. And this has been the philosophy of the Indian government to launch Project Tiger, Project Lion, Project Cheetah, which are all flagship species and also umbrella species to make landscape level conservation possible. However, conserving large carnivores is not easy because they compete with human interests. They kill our livestock, and sometimes they kill us and eat us as well. So this is a major contradiction of conservation, and many of the speakers before me have elaborated on this. What I would like to do is make a comparison between India and the United States. And if you see this, these are the large carnivores of India, and these are the large carnivores of the United States. I think I missed out on the jaguar, which occasionally makes incursions into the US. So that's the only thing missing. And if you look at these are the carnivores which I have ticked, which are capable of killing humans and have killed humans in the past. Now, if you just look at the statistics here, you see that India is about 1/3 the size of the US. Okay? but we have about 4 times the human density. Every 8th person in the world is an Indian. We are the largest populated country at about 1.4 billion people compared to what the United States has. The density of people is 464 per square kilometers compared to 38 per square kilometer in the US. Our GDP, we are a poor nation, much poorer than the United States. But the deaths resulting from carnivores are about anywhere between 225 to 250. These are only large carnivore deaths, equal number killed by elephants and many other wildlife like wild pigs and wild boar and so forth. Snake bite deaths, about 58,000. Rabies, 40,000. Road deaths, about 172,000. So in proportion to the magnitude of human mortality caused by other factors, carnivores contribute a very insignificant small amount of lethal attacks on people. Yet, they are magnified to an extent by media and social media and everything. And they are in the news, they are headlines. Nobody talks about a road accident. But if a tiger kills a human being, it's there in the headlines. So this is a major way how we perceive carnivore attacks on humans, and that's how our attitudes towards large carnivores are shaped. But we have been lucky. We still have an intact community of large carnivores, not by the managers or the policy of the government or anything else, but it's the attitude of the people. If you contrast the Abrahamic religions with the religions of the East, the Western religions talk about dominion of nature, while the Eastern religions, just like the Native Americans and the Aborigines of Australia, they talk about custodianship of nature. And this basic difference is what has allowed biodiversity to persist despite the human pressures, 1.4 billion people, as well as poverty. I think it's the attitude which matters, not the density of humans which matters. We are next neighboring the first national park in the world. But India had abhayaranyas, which were akin to national parks, forests without fear, established by King Ashoka in 400 BC. So we have a legacy of setting aside protected areas for conservation. The first legislation on this planet, how to live within forests without depleting the resources, was written by this gentleman, which it's not coming in my picture. I think he should now. This gentleman here, Chanakya, who wrote Arthashastra at the time of Ashoka's his son, Chandragupta Maurya, of how to live within forests and what regulations and everything. And this was made into a legislation by the kingdom then. So the first acts of conservation were written in India. Okay. The modern ethos, the modern conservation era of India started somewhere after we got independence from the British. During the British era, we had the same Western values, bounties on wildlife, poisoning campaigns, eradication of predators, of ungulates, crop raiding issues. We lost a lot of our wildlife. But the modern conservation began in the 1970s. And today we can boast of having the world's largest tiger population, which is about almost 4,000 animals. Asiatic lions, which have recovered from 50 individuals to about 900 today. The largest Asian elephant population, we have close to about 15,000 leopards. The Wildlife Protection Act, which is built upon the Endangered Species Act, but it's much more stringent in its actions and penalties to poachers and all that kind of stuff, was enacted in 1972, and the Forest Conservation Act in 1980. We had started with Project Tiger with 9 reserves. Now we have 53 tiger reserves. Okay? So these are some of the science-based management and so on, so which has resulted in having good recovery of our wildlife in recent times. However, we were not without any problems. We were counting our tigers based on their pug marks. And this was a major fallacy because, there were paper tigers in the country, and every bureaucrat who was in charge of a park and he was transferred, would leave behind more tigers in his park without actually knowing how many there were. It was good for their CEs and their CRs and confidential reports and all that, and you'd go up the ladder with that. So we had close to about 3,500 tigers, when in reality we had only 1,400. So this task of developing a scientific monitoring program for the country, for tigers specifically, was assigned to me and my team way back in 2006. And since then, we've been monitoring the entire country every 4 years for counting tigers. But using the tiger as an umbrella species, the monitoring system covers all megafauna. So I use the resources which were given for tiger conservation and tiger monitoring to count all wildlife mammalian fauna across the country. And the effort which you can see is phenomenal. It is like going to the moon and coming back halfway. That kind of effort. We got the Guinness World Record as the largest wildlife survey for doing this thing. So we put about 32,500 camera traps in the last assessment, and we had about 47 million images. Now, processing this requires a lot of technology, and we use artificial intelligence to actually segregate our photographs to species developed in-house. And all this data, which is collected by the government officials, the guards, not just biologists, because it's impossible for a biologist to do this kind of work. So you have to bring in the government machinery and use the guards, the forest beat guards, and so on and so forth to do this collection of data. It's now all done on a mobile application. So every guard is trained in using this track log basis mobile application called M-Stripes, and they record animal signs in an occupancy framework. They collect data on vegetation. They collect data on line transits for encounter rates of ungulates, dung plots, and human disturbance plots. So this is done across the country in 21 states of the country wherever tigers occur. We then subsequently, once the folders are segregated to species, we take the tigers out, the leopards out, which are recognizable by their coat patterns. And we have developed a pattern recognition software, which allows us to fingerprint tigers and leopards. Now, you can identify individual tigers based on this, but as you know, all tigers are not going to come in front of your cameras. There's a detection issue, and you can't put cameras everywhere that there are tigers. So there are more tigers than what we can actually photograph. So that has to be accounted for with statistical models, modern science, especially explicit mark recapture, and so forth. So in the last assessment, we had about 97,399 tiger images, of which we could identify them in 3,080 tigers. So this is the minimum number of tigers that we have. We also use this software to do crime fighting for tigers. So there was a seizure in Nepal a few years ago, and the skin was seized in Kathmandu. And we actually, from our database, we could trace it to the live tiger, which was shot, well, it was not shot, but which was trapped outside of Pench Tiger Reserve in central India. So we do this for the government of India and for the crime fighting agencies like the police and the customs and so forth. They give us the information and we track down this. So it gives us the hotspots where tiger poaching occurs. And you can actually trace the pathways by which skins are smuggled out of the country. We don't have an indigenous market for any trophies or any skins because the Wildlife Protection Act prohibits any kind of hunting. So there is no hunting in India. Okay, so there's a market outside of India for doing this. Just to illustrate how this is done, this large country scale, I'll just animate some of the things. So I'm going to talk about, this is the density map of tigers across India. And I'll just show you how we come to this density surface by highlighting, there's a marker here, right? By highlighting this part of the Tarai Arc landscape, which borders Nepal, right? So just concentrate on this part. This is the Himalayas, this is Nepal, and this is China. So this is the landscape which I'm talking about, Nepal here, and this is the Tarai landscape, the floodplains and the foothills of the Himalayas, the floodplains of the Ganges. Now, every blue swiggle is a 5-kilometer trail recorded on that digital phone by a forest guard. And wherever it detects a tiger sign, it will come up in red. So you know where the tigers are by looking at tiger sign, pug marks, rake marks on the tree, tiger scat, tiger kill, visual encounter of a tiger, or hearing a tiger roar. Okay, so this is telling us where the tigers are distributed. We then go in and put camera traps. In this landscape, there were 3,900 odd camera traps which were deployed, and we captured 804 individual tigers across this landscape. Okay, but mind you, you can see there are areas where there are tigers, for example, here, but no camera traps in this region as well. So there are areas which you can't, put everywhere because camera traps are expensive. So you have to account for this. And so we use model-based inference, statistical inference, where we model tiger and especially explicit mark recapture framework, and using the covariates of tiger sign encounter rates, human disturbance, and prey encounter rates. And as tiger sign increases, density of tiger increases, human disturbance it decreases, prey encounters it increases, and the actual number of tigers, estimated number of tigers, in this landscape, the Rayak landscape on the Indian side, was estimated at about 819 tigers with a confidence limit. So this is how we do it for the entire country, and you get a density map of tigers. And this tells us where the tigers are, how many they are, how well connected they are, and what management options are required in each of this. And then we go ahead and model corridors, and I'll talk about that a little while later. So what we see is since 2006 onwards till 2022, when I was involved with this work, the next census is going to happen this year, coming year. You see that the tiger population has been increasing at a steady rate of about 6% per year in the country. And we have close to about almost now 3,700 tigers. Looking at occupancy, long-term occupancy, a 20-year data set is what I'm showing you here, an occupancy analysis. So this map here shows you grids, 10 by 10 square kilometer grids, in which there was persistent presence of tigers for the past 20 years, grids which were colonized, grids which were transitional, that means tigers became extinct and recolonized them, or vice versa, and grids in which forested grids which had habitat, but tigers were absent or extinct. Okay, and you see here the characteristics of these grids. What we find is that tigers are increasing at about 3,000 kilometers every year annually. And currently they occupy about 138,000 square kilometers from 300,000 square kilometers of habitat. So almost 1/3 of the tiger habitat is currently occupied in India. We still have potential to increase our tigers across India. Persistent source populations were found in spared habitats, protected areas without people. Okay. Persistent tiger presence. So sparing habitats for tigers, just like your protected areas without people living inside it, was a very important element for allowing tigers to recover. Tiger extinction and absence were characterized by habitat loss. They were far away from these protected source populations, the protected areas, and they had very little wild prey. Okay. So this is an important finding, not that it is not intuitive, but now we have data to say that. If you look further into this, on a scale of urbanization, what we see is that very high urbanization, there is low persistence of tigers and low persistence of colonization. But wherever there is low urbanization, makes sense. These grids had permanent presence of tigers, as well as new grids were colonized by tigers. Poverty. This is very interesting because you see this is the poorest of areas, and these are the richest of areas, but it's the middle strata of prosperity where tigers flourished, and along with tigers, biodiversity flourished. So it's the highest, the richest people where you have high urbanization. Cities are, of course, devoid of tigers, and very poor areas where people are dependent on forest produce, bushmeat consumption, is where you lose your biodiversity. So urbanization and poverty can be looked upon as a sort of a parabolic relationship with conservation of biodiversity. The middle strata, prosperity, people are happy living in rural landscapes, is the most optimal situation for conserving biodiversity. Tigers also provide a lot of incentives for conservation because they are tourist magnets. And once you have tourism come in, just like you have in Yellowstone, they can generate a lot of money for the local economy. And we'll talk about that a little while later. So we have a huge problem with poaching, and poaching is what limits tigers across their range, not just in India, but Nepal, Bangladesh, northeast, southeast. Sorry, I pressed something. Yeah, so this is wherever there has this part of India has got armed conflict in terms of a Naxal movement, anti-government movement, where there are armed militants fighting the government. And when you have loss of law and order, the peace is not prevailing, and in such situations, poachers just have a field day, and that's where you lose tigers. So the extinction grids which you see in here, the dark, this part, the gray grids, are maximum in the area wherever there's an armed conflict. So what you require for tiger conservation or for biodiversity conservation is peace and prosperity. If you have these two and there's law and order, then wildlife conservation is possible. Okay, so this is the graphic here, which tells you the persistent grids and the absent grids with armed conflict. You see the amount of extinction which has happened wherever in grids which we had armed conflict. So we know what conditions are required for tiger conservation. But how large should a tiger reserve be, which is free of people, spared landscapes? For that, we did a population viability analysis, and we find this is demographic viability, not genetic. We see that you need at least 20 breeding females or 20 breeding units to make a population viable for the next 50 years, next 100 years. And anything below that, that's the critical threshold, depending on the demographic parameters of tigers, anything below that results in very high extinction rates. So we recommended to the government that at least 700 to 1,000 square kilometers of areas should be the source population spread out in the landscapes of India, which are then connected by corridors to have tigers recover. And they converted this into the Wildlife Protection Act amendment in 2006. Oops. All right. So the model today for a tiger reserve is that you have a spared habitat, a human-free habitat of anywhere between 800 to 1,000 square kilometers as the core, surrounded by a buffer, which is a multi-use area in which people can live and do their livelihoods, but major polluting industry or mining or anything which has a high impact on biodiversity is not permitted in those areas. So this is the model which came out of our research and is currently the law of conservation in the Wildlife Protection Act. But creating 1,000 square kilometers of space between 1.5 or 4 billion people is not easy. Space comes at a premium. The Forest Rights Act, which was enacted in 2006, prevents eviction of residents from within forests to outside forests. You could evict people if you're making a dam for national interest, if a highway is coming through, or if you're making an industry. Yes, eviction is possible, but not possible for conservation. So we amended the Wildlife Protection Act to give an incentive to people to move out. Incentives is what we've been talked about. And this incentive was $20,000 as it stands today to every adult in the family to move out voluntarily from within the core of a tiger reserve, which amounts to about 12 years of minimum wage to a person. Okay? So just to give you a perspective, $20,000 doesn't sound that big, but it's really big for the Indian condition, which is about 12 years of minimum wage. And people who live inside the core of a tiger reserve are plagued. They can't do any farming because there's crop raiding from ungulates. Their children are at risk for predation. There are no schools, there are no hospitals, there's no electricity, there are no roads. They can't sell their produce. So most people take this option to join mainstream society. Everybody's willing for a chance to get out of that poverty and come and join mainstream society. So this has been a win-win situation. I think it's the only country in the world who does this. And it's a big win for politicians as well, because the people who move out to a better livelihood vote for the government who has given them this money. So the politicians, local politicians, are very happy with this scheme because they get local votes. Their vote bank increases. And this has helped us create habitat, which is about 75,000 square kilometers free of humans within the Indian landscape for tigers. Okay? And we spend close to about 12 million, that's in rupees in crores, and that's the conversion. But if you don't want to do it, it's about $12 million annually, which are spent on relocating people and giving them the incentive to move. So that's a big amount of money for India. So this is a picture of a satellite imagery of vegetation cover and tiger reserve superimposed on it. So those of you who have been to India, this is Kanha Tiger Reserve, Pench Tiger Reserve, Achanakmar, Satpura. And you can see that the landscape is nicely forested. So these are the core areas in which the source populations are there, and tigers should be able to move across this landscape. Wonderful situation. But as soon as you superimpose road network, okay, so it's highly fragmented. So we have to, address this fragmentation. If you don't, then the source populations are not going to be viable in the long term, because many of them don't meet the criteria of having 20 breeding units, at least when we started this research. Now, most of them are individually viable. And if you see this, next slide. So what we do is we use the data that we have and use modern science like circuitscape theory, which allows you to build in corridors based on resistance pathways of electric flow. So this is a circuitscape output, which tells us how tigers actually move between these tiger reserves. The light yellow ones are the paths of least resistance. These are urban sprawl, which we talked about by earlier presentation, impermeable to tigers, and these red lines are highways, motorways. So if you see that this corridor between Kanha and Pench is cut by this major highway, which joins the city of Nagpur to Jabalpur. Okay? And this was a major, we fought this battle for 20 years, and eventually the road authorities agreed with we needed to do, and we built the world's longest and India's first wildlife passageway. And we have made sure that this highway also comes in and our corridor is not cut, and we see tigers actually crossing the underpass quite regularly. Now, every tiger is not the same. So this is the genetic analysis of our 157 tigers from across India, and you see that each bar represents one tiger. And the more the colors, the more genetic variability is there in that tiger. So if you see the central Indian landscape, you see that the tigers in the central Indian landscape have the maximum genetic diversity. But if you look at the Northeast and the southern Western Ghats, they're very distinct and different from the rest of the tiger population. So what we do is, okay, oops. So you have, tigers, oops, it went off. Sorry, just shut down on me. I'm sorry about that, but hopefully this should work. So these are different color morphs of tigers, right? And so there is a lot of genetic variability in tigers themselves. And every tiger population is not the same for conservation. So you can see that how the DFA diagram here, differential principal component analysis, shows that this northeast population is distinct, as well as the southern Ghat population is different. So what we've done is looked at vulnerability of populations to extinction, their diversity, and their distinctiveness to prioritize tiger populations for conservation. And what we find is that the northeast population here and the southern Western Ghats and the Sundarban populations come up as the priority populations, which require conservation attention more than anything else. Shifting gears to snow leopard. So we assess the same way we assess tigers, we assess snow leopards in the northern state of India, in Kashmir, in the Ladakh region, and we use specially explicit markery capture, actually informed by radio telemetry, which we radio collared snow leopards. And we developed a unique identifying marking for snow leopard, same way as we do with stripes. The snow leopards have also a nice coat, but this coat being so furry, it can change with the wind. Okay, so we developed a marking system based on their forehead. The trick was to get the leopards to actually pose in a manner so that we could get a picture of their forehead. And this perfume, Gavin-kind perfume, was a big attractant. You spray a little on their side, and the snow leopards bend to smell it, and you get a nice picture of their foreheads. And that is then used as a pattern recognition software to identify leopards. And we have probably the world's largest snow leopard population in Ladakh, which is documented today. I don't know if there's any other population larger than this. We have snow leopard biologists in the audience, so they can correct me if I'm wrong. But about 477 individuals covering a landscape of about 47,000 square kilometers. If you look at the diet of the snow leopard in this region, you see that a lot of livestock, about 47% of the diet is livestock. Goat and zo, which is a hybrid between a yak and a cow. And this goat, which is highly prized, it's where your Kashmir wool comes from. Okay? So it's the Pashmina goat, very valued by the locals, and snow leopards love it. So there's a huge conflict between the local economy, livelihoods, as well as snow leopard conservation. And we had a huge retaliatory movement of killing snow leopards by poisoning, by snaring, by trapping, by hunting. And this was a major deterrent for snow leopards. But now, in recent times, the snow leopard has become, again, a magnet for tourism. And the local people have realized that if we conserve snow leopards and use the tourism potential of snow leopard, there is more money to make than from selling their pelts. And this is very important. The homestays which have come up, the snow leopard watching, which happens in Ladakh, and government-sponsored and NGO-sponsored schemes which have made snow leopard-proof stockades for holding these goats has made a huge impact in conserving snow leopards in this landscape. Again, shifting gears to Asiatic lions, the only lion population in Asia is found in Gujarat in India. And this used to be the distribution of lions before the British era. Now they're found only in this small region here. This is this part here, the Gir protected area. We had only 50 lions remaining, just like your buffalo. But today, the lions have spread from out inside the Gir protected area to occupy about 30,000 square kilometers of human-dominated landscape. And these lions live in industrial, pastoral, agricultural landscape. You can see here containers in a shipyard. They feed a lot on dead cattle. The state of Gujarat is vegetarian. Beef slaughter is prohibited by law. So we have a lot of cattle which die, and these dead carcasses are dumped, and the lions have a bonanza of food. Okay? So that the conflict levels are very low. And lion conservation has been possible in India by these rulers of the state before pre-independence era. So if you look at this, this is the kind of typical landscape you will see lions in an agro-pastoral landscape. Okay? And conflict, the people who live inside the forest have lived for centuries with lions, and they know there's very little conflict there because they know how to live with lions. So they change their lifestyles to live with lions. But when the lions have expanded into this 30,000 square kilometers where there were no lions for the last 200 years, people don't know how to deal with them. And that's where the conflicts arise. They're learning how to live with them. The lions are also adapting and the people are also adapting. So we did a survey by looking at all the villages across the landscape, and we surveyed over 1,000 people, 1,000 some odd people, to look at whether they are positive, they're tolerant towards lions in their neighborhood, they hate lions, or they're indifferent. And we see that in villages where there was high conflict, a lot of cattle lost due to lions, people like lions, just contradictory to what we were expecting. Okay? Compared to no conflict. You see, these are where villages there's no conflict. And this is, people don't like them as much. And the reason for this is that people actually use lion as a tourism icon. And they let the cattle or livestock be killed. The government gives them compensation, and they invite tourists to see the lions. So it's a win-win situation in both ways. And this is what has allowed lions to live. And if you look at this, the reasons for liking, being tolerant to lions are economic benefits. And in the Gir landscape, a lot of economic development and activities which support livelihoods has happened due to lions being in the area. Another project that I've been involved with as a principal scientist was reintroducing the cheetah into India. And we lost the cheetah about 75 years ago. The only large carnivore that we lost after India became independent. And if you may not know, but the name cheetah is of Sanskrit origin. So India, and these are some rock paintings, which are about 30,000 years old, Neolithic cave etches where the cheetah has been depicted. So cheetah has been an integral part of our culture and our religion, and it's mentioned in our Vedas and all that. And we believe that it's a moral obligation of all civilized societies with the economic ability that profess high ethics to try to undo the wrong that humans have done on this planet. And reintroduction is one of the ways where we can address this. So I'll just show you a short video of about a minute. And this is how we brought back the cheetah. So we brought cheetahs back from Southern Africa, Namibia, and South Africa. They were dotted the same way you catch wolves and puma here. Giving them a tranquilizer so they would not get stressed on the flight. We hired a beautiful chartered plane with a tiger welcoming the cheetah. Took them and then used army helicopters to ferry them to the park. And this is the first cheetah on Indian soil which came up there. They were quarantined. The Prime Minister of India released the first three cheetahs on his birthday. So now there is a huge political backing for the project. We are sure that as long as this government is in power, the cheetah project. The speed of the backpack and the cheetah are shaped by the species.
Bringing back a large carnivore at the apex of the trophic level results in a cascading effect on the ecosystem. This has been eliminated by human actions, and today we witness a bringing back of this evolutionary force. Hopefully, cheetahs like these two and many others from southern Africa will help establish viable populations in India in many of the reserves that we have. The threats that resulted in their extinction have been abated in our country now. We have created habitat which is suitable for these animals. The prey base is there, the legal system is in place, and the political will is also there.
So I'll leave you with this quote. The fate of wildlife conservation is not in the hands of scientists, conservationists, or managers, but on how society views and values it, what it is willing to pay, and how it motivates the political will to do so. Thank you. These are institutions I acknowledge for my 30 years, 45 years of wildlife career. Thank you.